Welcome back to This is a Commander channel, where this is a Commander channel, and today I'm going to talk about Commander Tough Rules and Cool Interactions, episode 110. Today's episode is a subscriber-requested video. In last week's episode covering Magar, Sudo148 had a really good request. He said, "I was wondering if you have made or plan on making a video about Ashiok Wicked Manipulator. It just seems like it would be ripe with jank." And yes, it is indeed a very strange card due to one very specific ability that it has. So let's take a look. Ashiok Wicked Manipulator is a planeswalker with 3 loyalty abilities, but we're not going to focus on them for this episode, as Ashiok has a replacement effect that is just wild. The ability says that if you would pay life while your library has at least that many cards in it, exile that many cards from the top of your library instead. Like with a lot of things covered in this series, this ability is pretty straightforward in most situations, but what if you have out a card like Bolas's Citadel, which is an insanely powerful commander card that sees a lot of play in a whole lot of decks, making this scenario likely to come up in some games in which somebody's running this Ashiok. So let's read what the Citadel does. It says, you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than pay its mana cost. So Ashiok has a replacement effect that exiles things from the top of our library instead of us actually paying and losing the life from that payment. So the question becomes, what if we're paying that life to play something that is from the top of our library? Will Ashiok's replacement effect cause that card to be exiled from the library before it has a chance to resolve? To find the answer for this, we must look at the steps towards casting a spell, which I've covered in parts in earlier episodes, and this time we will be looking at CR 601.2a, which covers the very first part of casting a spell, and it says, to propose the casting of a spell, a player first moves that card, or that copy of a card, from where it is to the stack. It becomes the topmost object on the stack. It has all of the characteristics of the card, or the copy of the card, associated with it, and that player becomes its controller. Any continuous effects that modify the characteristics of the spell as you start casting it begin as it is put on the stack. The spell remains on the stack until it resolves, it's countered, or a rule or effect moves it elsewhere. So that last sentence about it staying on the stack until a rule or effect moves it elsewhere seems to be the answer here. Ashiok's replacement effect will send it to exile before it has a chance to resolve. Or does it? What is it that Ashiok actually replaces? It's when we pay life that it replaces that life paid with exiling cards instead. So now the question becomes, when do we actually pay life to cast the spells via the Citadel? And that is much later in the steps to casting a spell, which is CR 601.2h, which says, the player pays the total cost. First, they pay all costs that don't involve random elements or moving objects from the library to a public zone in any order. Then, they pay all remaining costs in any order. Partial payments are not allowed. Unpayable costs can't be paid. So this means that you don't pay life, which is being replaced, until you have already physically moved that card from the top of your library to the stack. So when you do go to exile those cards from the top of your library, the card you're playing is no longer there to be removed. But now, the plot thickens. This is only for casting a spell. What if you're playing a land via the Citadel? Its ability does allow us to play lands, and they don't have a mana value. Their mana value is 0. So that means even if we did have to pay equal to its mana value, it would just be 0. So we don't actually have to pay life to play them. But what if that land we're trying to play is a shock land, like Blood Crypt? and we want to have it enter the battlefield tapped. We can see on the crypt that it has a replacement effect of its own for how it can enter the battlefield, and it says that As Blood Crypt enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. Now, most players will know that lands are not cast like spells, but what they may not know is how they are played as a special action. And the details of this are in CR 305.1 that says, a player who has priority may play a land card from their hand during a main phase of their turn when the stack is empty. Playing a land is a special action. It doesn't use the stack. Rather, the player simply puts the land onto the battlefield. Since the land doesn't go on the stack, it is never a spell, and players can't respond to it with instants or activated abilities. So how does this complicate things with Ashiok? The only reason the spell version of this scenario worked is because you moved the card to the stack before you made the life payment that would be replaced. But now we're skipping the stack part of all of this. So what does this mean? Does the crypt exile itself from the library if we try to play it untapped? Crazy enough, this is one of those cases in which Wizards of the Coast had to create a whole new rule just to accommodate a new card, and that new card is this Ashiok. And that new rule is CR 614.13c that says, while applying a replacement effect that modifies how a permanent enters the battlefield, another replacement effect may cause a player to mill or exile cards from the top of a library. In that case, any card that is entering the battlefield from that library won't be included in that effect, even though those cards are in the library as the effect is applied. So you can tell by the language there that it is clearly referring to this exact scenario. So you can play shock lands untapped through all of this because of that very specific sub-rule that allows for it to happen. Great suggestion, Pseudo148, for this very tricky and niche thing that is a perfect example of just how complex this game is. Anyhow, that's all I've got for today's episode. As always, I hope that all of you have found this video to be entertaining at least, and I hope that a few of you have even learned something about the crazy rules in this great game of Magic. Have a good one. Ta-ta!